It's important to seek out sources that challenge you.
What does good culture look like for you?
It is your mission, it is your vision. All of those things are important to have, but the action behind them and the action that speaks those words to truth, that's what really matters.
How leaders can level up so they can help their company's culture be better.
Senior leadership have got to care about culture, and then they've got to do a really good job training leadership, especially middle managers, and giving them what they need. An MIT Sloan study, and it said that toxic culture is 10 times more powerful in predicting workplace attrition than compensation. People should enjoy going to work more. We don't have to love it. It's work. But hopefully people don't feel their own version of the Sunday scaries.
I'm going to ask you, what am I missing?
You know, there's one thing we didn't touch on, which is part, I didn't bring it up, but I do think
Welcome to Crave, the IFDA Podcast. My name is Julien LeBlanc, your host for this series of great conversations with industry and non-industry leaders. The food industry is evolving rapidly, and so are its leadership challenges. Our mission with this IFDA Podcast is to help you stay ahead of the curve with fresh leadership insights and strategies. Before we get to today's guest, I'd like to recognize Cut and Dry, our sponsor for Crave. Cut and Dry is the nation's leading e-commerce platform offering the seamless ability for distributors and their partner manufacturers to promote and sell more cases with our best-in-class operator user experience. It's now time to welcome my guest for today's conversation, Hannah Ubl. Hannah is the co-founder of Good Company Consulting and the co-author of The Future of Work is Human, Transforming Company Culture for a Post-Pandemic World, and of course is a phenomenal keynote speaker, and I'll dig into that, and strategist in very high demand. Hannah is on a quest to eliminate the Sunday scaries, which I can't wait to peel the onion on that one, and help organizations create a workplace that just doesn't suck. What a great place. First of all, welcome to Crave, Hannah.
Thank you, Julien. I'm happy to be here.
First of all, what's your obsession or what's the quest of eliminating these Sunday scaries? I love that term.
Yeah, so it's all because of a background with good leaders and different leaders. And I worked at an organization where the culture was absolutely fantastic. Like, everyone was excited to go to work. Everyone was excited to have this amazing work experience every single day. And I was in the work of consulting, and I also would talk to friends. And I learned very quickly how few people have that experience at work. And so there's the kind of this personal element of what that felt like. I felt being in a great culture. We've all been in places where it's not a super wonderful culture either. And then I also have a background in generational consulting. So when I was at this really amazing company, I was having the opportunity to give presentations about generational differences, and the preparation process for that is asking people within the company, what do you like? What don't you like? What would you like to see change? And so much of what I heard on those calls, people would say, ooh, yeah, you know what? Hold on, let me close the door 1 second. And then they would just kind of tell me all the things that they were feeling about work. And after doing this work for so long and being in a really wonderful culture, when I left that company, myself and my business partner, Lisa, we were like, I feel like this is our next step. Like, I feel like this is our mission. People should enjoy going to work more. We don't have to love it. It's work, okay? Like, work will always be work, but hopefully people don't feel their own version of the Sunday scaries. So that's really the longer version of why this mission is just so real. It's so powerful. I feel it so much.
Well, I must say, when I was preparing for this call, I mean, the clarity of your messaging and the quest you're on, I don't know, I can physically see you kind of wake up every day and say, okay, how do I help organizations not suck? I think that's fantastic.
Yes, I feel it very strongly. And it's so easy to find headlines where you read all the stories of organizations who do have cultures that kind of suck, or their leadership methods just aren't wonderful. And especially in the past 5 years with COVID and how that affected workplaces, it's easy to see the information out there. So I'm really passionate about it.
And Hannah, would you say, because I think we all sometimes play a game of leadership and self-deception, so organizations might even do some kind of engagement survey and they'll say, well, our culture is great. It's almost like they're leading people maybe towards metrics they're comfortable with. do you think there is a game of leadership and self-deception being played there from the standpoint of, I'd like to talk about good. I'm not going to use the word bad, but room for improvement. So if you were to just put companies in buckets, are there great cultures out there? Why not start there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are, and those engagement surveys, I don't work for an engagement survey, so I can't say that I know all the ins and outs of it. I will say it's wonderful to have it as a leader if you're like, I want to know what people think. I want to know the progress. Like, I understand that, and I think it's a good thing. However, we all know the flaws to your point, and we know that, some people are like, this isn't really anonymous, right? Like, so I'm not going to tell you everything. And if I do tell you what needs to be fixed, are you going to actually fix it? So there's a lot of good with those engagement surveys. There's also the drawbacks. And even with that truth, I do think there are great cultures. I think specifically leaders. Like, I just think that there are some leaders out there who really care about people within the organization. And I think it's small companies. I think it might be larger companies. And we probably feel it when we're out doing our work. And even, when I had the chance to work with IFDA last year and talking to people, it's like they're going out and meeting people in different businesses all the time. I'm sure they can feel when they are going out, they're in the field, they're talking to people, they can get a sense of the culture when they talk to someone. So I do think great cultures exist. I do think not as great ones exist too. And I think if you're doing some really great things, that doesn't mean it will always stay that way. I think, culture is something that we always have to be thinking about, always having to be working to improve, because what's worked for a long time won't work for forever. Human beings are just, we're constantly shifting and changing. So that's just the nature of what it is.
It's a great way to put it. And I think, again, we're going to wander around here, culture, but one of the really good books I'd read at one point, and by the way, I've ordered your book, so can't wait to read it. So there you go.
Thank you.
There you go. I was hoping to get it before the call, but the good news is I get to meet you first, and then I get to digest the information. So I'll feel connected with one of the authors.
Yes.
The whole Zappos movement at one point, the culture book. And so maybe I guess two things that I'd like to dig in with this question is, what does good culture look like for you? So maybe let's flush that out. And then, playing off of, maybe you can explain a bit like the culture book or what a Zappos type company had done to maybe systemize their culture or try to make sure that they trap the feeling in a way that it was scalable. And yeah, I'll just kind of leave that a bit wide open. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Zappos was always a best in class. That was always something that people look to. I know, and there's certain other companies that people look to as well. To me, culture, it's one of those things that's hard to define succinctly. Like, if I were to, we describe it as it's your beliefs in action. So it's your core values, it is your mission, it is your vision. All of those things are important to have, but the action behind them and the action that speaks those words to truth, that's what really matters. And if we look at culture and the evolution, because I always have my generational hat on, like, culture used to be you show up and do your job. Like, that is culture. Like, you show up, you get paid, you go home. Like, that is culture. And then over time, we saw kind of a transition where culture became a little bit more sink or swim. I think especially if there's any sales individuals, I feel like the sales world was very much like, get in there, figure it out. You're not going to have a lot of hand holding, but you got this job for a reason. And many people in those jobs were like, good, leave me alone. That's fine. I'll figure it out. And then in the 90s, and for my brain is escaping me right now what it is, but there was a book about the importance of core values. And so at this time, everyone was saying, like, this is the answer. We need core values. And what we've seen when we work with companies now is that they have these core values. They may have them written on the wall, they're in the orientation materials, but people don't believe that they're true anymore. So what happens is that action piece starts to go away, and it feels a little bit like, oh, you're just kind of saying the words, so you think that's culture. And it's not. So we really look at the actions behind the words. And I think when we look at companies who are doing a good job of this, they say what the actions are. So if we approach it, like you're saying, from a sort of like a system-wide idea of how to do this, there are actions. And one company that we've looked at a lot for this is HubSpot. And we looked at this a lot in the pandemic too, because they have so much clarity around their culture. They even have, what I love, they have communication core values. So when you communicate within the organization and you are talking to each other, you're talking to customers, there are core values by which we communicate. So there's like company-wide and communication. And I think when there is that level of clarity and understanding, people can feel it. And then when there's accountability, we bring it back to, oh no, this was the agreement we had when we started with the company. This is why I work with this company, is because everyone is held to the exact same standard. So I think it's really that clarity and system-wide piece is there, but we all know too that starts with the mindset of leadership. So it's a lot of things that go together, but coming back around to it, I would say the cleanest way to say it for us is it's your beliefs in action.
I love that. And I think the key word obviously is action. And probably if I look, I mentioned kind of this culture book, and I've seen many of my clients that will define, hey, what does an action look like? What's a good action for this? What is a bad action? And I think also culture probably takes on different micro pockets within a business, not just business unit, but for instance, I think we all have a meeting culture without realizing we have a meeting culture,
Gosh, yes.
right?
Yes.
Some companies are
Yes.
very good at, hey, you never show up at a meeting unless it's clearly explained why the meeting is being called and what your role is in the meeting. And that alone changes meeting culture versus other cultures are just meeting for the sake of meeting for the sake of meeting. And then it almost becomes like meeting fatigue. Do you have examples, stories? I love great stories of examples, and it could be an example like I just mentioned around meetings, but of good culture, and then maybe examples of could have improved a bit, maybe.
So I think that meeting culture piece I think is so smart. I've also heard too, just the culture of like we only have 20-minute meetings. We don't do 30 minutes. We do 20 minutes. And I remember working with one group one time and this worked for their organization, so I don't think this is a catch-all for everyone else, but they had these fun consequences if you were late to the meeting. So like if you were late to the meeting, you had to do a 10-second plank. Or if you were late, you know what I mean? They would do these kind of fun things. So it would incentivize people to be like, no, I don't want to be late to the meeting. And I think that speaks to they were customizing it for their culture. So I think that's always something really good. There was another company that, I think it was IDEO. They had something called tea time, and it was in the afternoon for when people were in the office. And the idea of tea time is like there's no meetings scheduled. It is 15 minutes. Like this is not going to take a lot of time. There's tea, there's coffee. You just kind of go and have some treats and tea, and it's an opportunity just to talk to people. I think that, it's like that can be your culture where it's these small moments of connection because when we can bring in that human level, that can make a really, really big difference. Another organization that I worked with, one way they looked at culture, so they were going from not so great to great. And it was a hospital. And this hospital said that, we were in the situation where, psychological safety, we had chatted about that a little bit in email beforehand, and it was pretty low. So it was a hospital system, right? And so they said, we learned at one point that people in an OR, okay, the surgeon would be in the operating room, and the person who was in the operating room with them was scared to say, you're about to go to the wrong leg. Like a huge, important thing, which of course, like we eventually get there and solve it. But the idea that you're scared to speak up and even say something. So they had so many examples of this where they were like, okay, people are so scared to speak up. We can make so many mistakes that will affect so many lives and so many families. Like, we can't do this. What can we do? And they started this entire initiative to make people feel safe to speak up. They started a whole program. They changed on their badges. They had all of these kind of agreements in the organization of this is how we speak up. This is our kind of culture. They started with training from the leadership, and then it went on down, and people who were new to the company would get training as soon as they started. So again, it started with that leadership buy-in. And when I spoke to someone at this hospital, she said, Hannah, it took us about 4 years. Like, this was not a quick fix. This was not a quick change. But because we were so invested and we had so many tools to help people do this in a stressful environment, I wouldn't say hospitals are, chill on a regular basis. Like, there's a lot going on. And, over time, they were able to ship and shape their culture. So that's one of my favorite examples, I'd say, of a culture that wasn't so good and then it became a lot better.
Love the story. I don't know if you ever read the book, The Checklist Manifesto.
I haven't.
Well,
No, I
you would
haven't read
love
that one.
this because it would be a nice build to your experience here. So there was a gentleman who was professor at Harvard, doctor, I believe Dr. Atul Gawande, might not have pronounced that properly, but Dr. Atul. And he was tasked by the World Health Organization to come up with a checklist that would go in every surgery room basically in the world. So you can imagine. And the biggest learning was exactly what you described, that there's a power struggle that takes place in a surgery room because, you've got a surgeon coming in that might have more education, yet you might have someone that's a practitioner in there that's done this for 20 years that in theory knows that there's something wrong. So the idea with the checklist was it doesn't matter who goes through the checklist. We do it as a team, almost like before the plane takes off, if you look at the airline industry, because he was inspired by the airline industry when he did this as well. And exactly to your point, a lot of mistakes that were made is, we cut the wrong leg. Crazy, huh? It's crazy. This is the kind of stuff that I think I would challenge our listeners to say, and actually this is another thing that we could explore here is culture with intention. Because I think what we're talking about is you also have to design culture. You can't just assume that that stuff's going to happen on its own. What's your thoughts around maybe planned versus non-planned components of a good business culture, Hannah?
Yeah, intention is such a good word. I love that you said that, Julian, because I do think often people will see culture even as a checklist where it's like, okay, they said I need to have culture. So like, okay, we created a culture. Done. Okay, move. I have a lot of work to do, And I get that. Like I understand everyone has such full plates. However, when there is a lot of intention that goes into creating a culture and taking the time to actually create it, what you want it to be, and what it is and what you want it to be to have that aspirational piece as well, it's going to last. I think where things fall and where culture might fail and why people leave because of culture, right? Like we know, I think there was an MIT Sloan study and it said that toxic culture is 10 times more powerful in predicting workplace attrition than compensation, right? Like culture is huge. And it's why if people don't take the time to truly create, to care a lot about the culture that they're writing down, that they're talking about in orientation, that they're using as benchmarks for feedback, then it's not going to go super well. And I think part of that planning is also making sure that you're getting feedback from people. Like I know there's some really great consulting companies, they might come in and help you with your culture, but they don't listen to people who are there. So it can be like, wait, we're writing and speaking to a culture that isn't true. We're using words that we like, but we don't really know what they mean. Like, I think the word integrity is used a lot. I think trust, transparency. And it's like, yeah, what does that mean though? Because everyone will define that so differently. So I do think it's really important to take your time and to listen to people and to look at exit interviews and to like know what kind of culture people are looking for when you're hiring them. I mean, it's a lot of work, but it's worth it if you take the time in the upfront because then it can actually last and people are bought into it. That's one of the most important things. If people don't feel like they're valued and heard in the process, then they're not going to buy into it. And so it would be wasted time and investment and dollars. And no one wants that.
No one wants that. And I love how we've toggled a bit between, I think the checklist would be an example of if you define your culture, if you have, let's call it values in action or agreements in action, a checklist could be a tool to help you, but you don't lead with that because to your point, you can't you can't go through the box and say, oh, we've done our work now, we've got a great culture.
Right.
What are some examples maybe of sustaining culture? Because I think I've seen a lot, and I'm sure you've seen, where, hey, I was with a company or a client, and the culture was phenomenal, and I was there 2 years later, and I'm looking around, it's like, what happened? What happened to that feeling? Because I remember coming into the building saying, hey, if I had to work somewhere tomorrow, this is where I would want to hang my hat. Yet something's changed. So this whole notion of sustaining culture, any examples? Is there a committee? Like, what do you do here, Hannah, to keep this alive, keep it going?
I think that, organizations approach it differently based on their size, based on the money that they have. I know that you do need someone who's always watching over culture. So whether you have a person who that is their entire role, whether you do have a committee, it's just really important that you have someone responsible. And again, I know I keep saying this, but like it's true. If the CEO doesn't care about culture, it's not going to go, right? Like it does have to be senior leadership have got to care about culture, and then they've got to do a really good job training leadership, especially middle managers, and giving them what they need to sustain that culture as well. So I think that all is a really important piece. And I can think of a few examples of, to your point, sustaining culture, because it's not easy again. And we study generational shifts at my company, and there are a lot of generational shifts that are pushing back on standard modes of culture. And that happens with every generation. And so there's a couple examples I'm thinking of, and one of them is so very simple. And it was started by the CEO of an organization. And he wanted to make sure that the culture felt like one where people could speak up, where people could give feedback. And it would help make sure that they were on the right, like the dial of the culture was moving in the correct direction. And so what he did is at the end of every single meeting that he ever had, he would ask the question, what am I missing? And at the end of the meeting, you couldn't end the meeting unless someone answered that question. And he did this because he said, I know in my position, I can be disconnected from so much going on within the organization. And I know that people could be scared to bring something up to me because of who I am, the level of quote unquote power that I have in my role. And so he started this, what am I missing? And then that trickled down throughout the organization where people would ask the same question. So leaders would ask that of people too. And, some people might not know who are more entry level that the CEO was asking the exact same thing, but it was a behavior that just kind of helped carry that forward. So I really, really like that example. And I think too, one important piece for culture is stay interviews and whatever you want to call them, but I think stay interview is the easiest way to describe it. And it's asking people, why are you still here? And if you're still here because you've got a good paycheck, that's fine. I want to know that. So making sure that you're having those stay interviews to know why people are sticking around to prevent people from leaving, I think that can be a really powerful way to check into.
Love that. I've never heard that. I guess that's why you have these conversations. And I love that because you're right that I also find, and I mean, this is cliche, but most employees, most team members, their best, let's call it foot forward interview is their first interview and then their exit interview. So why are we not doing that stay interview along the way to check in? Huh?
Exactly, exactly. And I think, it's one of those where you can't just all of a sudden pop in and say like, okay, no, tell me everything that you're thinking, because if that never happens throughout the rest of the year in a variety of ways, then it probably won't you won't hear as much as you want to. And so I think in the process, it's like, what are you doing throughout the year to make sure people feel seen, heard, and valued so they're comfortable talking about culture later? So one thing I always think about is the importance of learning and development. Like that is people want to be invested in. Like they want to know that they can either grow and move up the ladder if that's something that they want, or they can gain new skills. And some organizations I know, they say like, here's $5,000, go find a coach, go to a conference. Like, I don't care, you use this money. Other organizations have L&D and they have themes that they try to stick to every year and build on that. And I've also worked with companies that do not invest at all in learning and development. And whenever I see that, it's kind of like, I think you're going to lose people. Like, I just think you will because you're not investing in them. So I think that's really one important thing. And then one of my favorites, this is something we share with clients a lot. And it is, I'm laughing because it's going to sound kind of silly, but I do think it's important. So we encourage people to operate by the platinum rule, communicate with others, right? The way they want to be communicated with. And part of doing that, we always say, is you need to know people's work preferences. You need to know their communication preferences. So make it part of your culture in the beginning to ask them questions that speak to this. So it can be simple things like, how do you prefer to receive feedback? What is a pet peeve that you have when working with people? What do you do that annoys other people that you work with? Just kind of asking those questions. And then we have this fun exercise where you answer. It's like, okay, are you an introvert or an extrovert? Are you a farmer who loves to take your time and be perfect along the way? Or are you a firefighter who just wants to put out fires? Do you like to make a lot of plans? Do you like to read the agenda before you go into a meeting? Or do you just like to show up and wing it because that's how you're your best self? So, it's having these conversations throughout, starting in orientation, starting when people start in the company, and then continuing to have them so people know how to work best with each other. And that alone can help sustain a culture because people are getting to know one another. And then they feel safe to speak up when a stay interview comes up later. They're like, well, I'm a firefighter. So I guess I wish that sometimes everything didn't have to be so perfect. So I guess that's something I want to work on. Maybe we can like normalize failure a little bit more here. You never know how it might turn out, but I think all of that collectively really has to happen in order for the culture to be sustained.
So good. And look, I think sometimes we can learn because I mean, imagine most of your time is spent in the business world, whether it's profit, nonprofit. And as I was digging into your bio, because we all have a journey, I noticed that you had a passion for theater. So I
I
noticed that
did.
back in the day, a little bit of Shakespeare action, huh? So
Yes,
maybe you can
yes.
tell the listeners why I'm making reference to this, because I'll tell you what I'd like to understand is my background tends to be more on the sports side, and I like to understand cultures within sport and how can we take the best and learnings and bring it to business. Talk to me about being part of a play of theater and how culture can impact the quality and what the audience is going to experience, I guess.
Absolutely. I mean, I got into theater, so I actually started my theatrical journey, and I don't know the versions of it that you have in Canada, and it varies in by state here too. But I was in speech, so forensics or debate is usually paired with speech. Okay, so I wasn't a debate kid. I went to one meeting and I was like, I am so non-confrontational. I will not be able to do this. So my Minnesotan soul was like, this is not for me. So I went into speech, and on the speech team, the kind of similar to a sports team, which I did up until high school, and then I was like, I'm not good at sports anymore. And so I got into speech, and the culture of the team was so, so strong. The leadership with the coaches, the leadership with the captains, how you carried yourself when you went to a school for a tournament, what you said, what you wore, how you showed up with other teams, how you were dedicated to your craft, like all of that was so important. And so I carried that with myself to college where I got more into theater. And it's actually where I met my business partner, Lisa. We were both part of Shakespeare Society.
There you go.
And
There you
it
go.
was people coming together because we both loved the Bard, we both loved Shakespeare, but it was the power of creating something with a group of people. And I think in theater and in sport, what will happen is you have people who are passionate, you have people who are fired up to be there, and a theater kid might look different than a track star, right? But still showing up with passion, still showing up with some big feelings. So you also learn how to navigate those big feelings and say, okay, collectively, what are we trying to do together to produce for an audience? And I think that piece, especially too, it's like we're always thinking not about ourselves, but about how other people are going to take in what we're doing. And it's like that's what's important. And I think that still translates to my work that I do today. It translates to how I think about culture, where it's like, it's not about you, the individual. You matter for sure, but how you are working together with a collective and how that impacts other people in a big way, that's also really, really important. So I would say theater helped me in that capacity, as silly as it is to think about, oh, acting in 12th Night helped me think about that. But it really did. I mean, it really, really did. And I'm grateful for the experience. And I still love theater today. I love going to it. I love being a part of it. But I'm not on stage anymore. I leave that for my career,
Well,
not
maybe
acting.
maybe there's a TED talk here around what I learned from my time around Shakespeare, huh? And
Maybe,
maybe
maybe
and
could
culture.
be.
Well, I'll tell you what's interesting though is if you think of a really really good culture, as I would define it. So I mean, up for debate here. And we won't make it confrontational because between a Canadian and someone from Minnesota, it'll be a nice, friendly debate. Trust is very important. And I must say that one of the things I love watching is improv. So we mentioned theater. Because you're only as good as your teammates on stage. I mean, you could be, I don't know, an A plus as someone on stage, but if you've got nothing to play with in the spirit of yes and, where do you go? Where do you go? And you see it. And I'm sure you've been to Second City, and I would recommend it to all our listeners because there's so many learnings even in business, which is how do we operate with a yes and mindset versus a yes but mindset? And you can feel that in cultures that are like, well, let me tell you all the reasons why this won't work versus yes, love what you're saying, Hannah, and we could explore this or we could build on that. And then you've got this very unique culture from that standpoint.
Love that. And I completely agree with you. And I think the trust component, I mean, yeah, when I think about culture, like that's one of the beliefs is we trust each other. So then we yes and, right? And I think you can feel that on teams, right? Like you can feel when people say, okay, yes, I might not 100% agree with what you were saying. And maybe there's something I don't know, or maybe there's something you don't know, and we can work together to get to the next step. So I think that trust is important. And I will say one thing we talk about as an organization at Good Company Consulting sometimes is in work, there's a serious lack of play. And I understand it. Again, I'm very understanding of a lot of these realities. However, I think what play does, like you're describing, like improv is many, many things. One of the things is play. You're like experimenting and trusting someone to create, to innovate, to like come up with something funny, to explore, create a story. And I always just think, there's ways for adults to come together in an organization, whether it's at a team outing, and it doesn't have to be a trust fall. I personally don't like stuff like that. I'm like, oh, no, thank you. But if we do like a collaborative team play kind of thing, it can make me feel safer around you because I am less on guard or less defensive. And I think that we sometimes need outside tools to help us get into that yes and mindset.
Well, look, I think I like the word play, joy, fun, because that's when we're at our best. And I think you can design that a bit without, getting too far out to your point that we're going to, I don't know, walk through a fire. And I'm sure there's a place for that. So not to dump on that idea. But if you think about it, imagine going into a meeting and saying, this is a yes and meeting, so we can only build ideas. Oh, this meeting, we're going to take on an avatar. So we're gonna look at the problem through a different lens, like if we're a different company. Like if we were Starbucks, for instance, how would they attack this if it was customer service? If we were Apple, I'm just throwing a couple of usual suspects, but it changes the energy and the dynamics, and suddenly you're not in the food business, hospitality business. You're in the experience business. So you're going to look at it through a different lens.
Yeah, I love that idea. I love that idea. And it gives people, it alleviates the sense of stress of like, oh, I don't have to be on. I don't need to come up with the right solution because, and especially right now, I mean, people are worried about their jobs. They're worried about security. They're worried about, so many times there's this fear like, oh, I can't mess up. Oh, I can't say something that's, incorrect. And when we give people the space to do that, like that, I love that example that you shared. I think it can make such a profound impact. Sometimes people need to, like shed, I would say, kind of the armor of feeling they need to be a certain way, right? Like it takes time. Some people will be more for it than others, but it can make such a huge difference.
And if you've created the conditions and the environment, to your point, psychological safety, there's trust, we reward failure, we reward fun, suddenly the armors or the layers start shedding. And you get the true self that shows up in the best version of that individual. I'd love to now talk about leadership, because what we know, and you mentioned, and I love what you said, if your CEO or if the VPs or the directors are not bought in, I mean, the culture, you can do all the little things, but it's going to be hard. And maybe inspired by JFK's favorite, one of my favorite quotes, it's not just what the country is going to do for you, is what can you do for your country. Let's bring it back to a business. What advice is there, books, is there ideas, is there TED Talks of how leaders can level up so they can help their company's culture be better? Because if you're just sitting there saying, I want a great culture, I'm also going to call you out as a friend, as a mentor, as a colleague to say, like, what are you bringing to the party, my friend?
Yes, I completely agree. I think for myself, so what's interesting about this too, I think, is that we're all drawn to different things when it comes to leadership. And I think it's important to seek out sources that challenge you. So it might be easy to go to things and say, like, that's exactly how I lead. I love it. They say to keep doing it. I'm going to keep doing it. It might be good to seek out something that's a different leadership principle, a different leadership idea. And whether that's a TED Talk, whether that is going to different podcasts, I think that can be really useful. And I will say one of my favorite podcasts that I listen to that isn't specific to work, it is not specific to leadership, is Hidden Brain. I don't know if you've ever listened to
No,
that one.
but thank you. I was looking, so add it to the list. Hidden
Added to the
brain.
list, the Hidden Brain, Shankar Vedantam is the host, and I think understanding our brains and how the human brain works, it just makes a massive difference in understanding ourselves. I think that's a really important thing too. Like leaders, we have to understand who we are. We need to know why we show up the way we do. We need to show up and understand, when do we get angry? When do we get stressed? When do we act in ways we wish we wouldn't? When do we act in ways we love? Like we have to really get to know ourselves before we can even lead. So what I like about Hidden Brain is it gives you access and understanding to yourself and to others in something that isn't directly related to leadership. And a podcast, of course, I feel like a lot of people listen to. I love Adam Grant's podcast. I think that
Love Adam.
oh,
Yes.
great work. I absolutely adore it. And I'm constantly listening to things like outside of leadership as well. Like I have kind of funny. Some of the people that I used to lead became therapists. And I like to think, it's not about me, right? That has nothing to do with me. They just went a different path. And there was a podcast that was shared with me. I can't remember the name of it right now. I should have written this down. And it was about, and trust me, I'll get there, but it was about the triangle of drama. And it's like when there is drama between people, people fill different roles. And I thought it was so interesting because I, listening to it, immediately thought of work. I was like, this is a podcast for therapists, but I'm applying this to work because drama shows up in work environments and I hear it from clients all the time. So I'm trying to seek out resources like that. And one of my favorite books is Radical Candor. We use that one all the time. My business partner and I, even Lisa and I, will say, "Hey, need to have a radically candid conversation with you right now." And it's our entryway to say, let's have some good feedback, tough feedback with each other. So yeah, there's so many sources. I could go on and on, but that's where I start. That's where I start.
And you mentioned Lisa. So you were telling me that Lisa's going to be joining IFDA Smart conference.
Yes, she is.
What did you tell Lisa about how to prepare and what to expect, and why she should be excited about the IFDA community?
Yes. Well, I first told her it was a great crowd. So I said that. And I was like, it's a great crowd. They are on board. They will laugh with you. They will have fun with you. And we always love to see that. And I think to your point, the crowd understands that generational differences exist. I think within their own organizations or when they're going to a restaurant and it's passing over from grandpa to grandchild. And it's like, oh, you don't want me to show up in person. You just want to talk to me via email. You don't want me to leave a voicemail. So it's like, wait, but I have all of these things that I have been doing for years to build relationships, to make like all of these things, and you hate them. What do I do? So it's like, it's so many shifts, so many changes. So one of the things I told her is I said, we just scratched the surface of talking about generations last year because it's a huge topic. We wrote a book on it in 2017. We're writing a book on Gen Z right now. Like you can just fill pages with this topic. And so what I told Lisa is I said, you are going to get to go very deep in understanding generational differences now and how it's showing up with the differences within the generations of distributors, of restaurants, like all of these people who are working and play together, and how you communicate and build relationships across those lines, personally and professionally, which I think a lot of people who might be in a sales role or in any kind of relationship-based role, oh man, it's hard. I just think it's really hard because people might say they want something, but they actually want something else. So it's kind of, you have to be so intuitive and knowing what really works and being willing to flex and being willing to bend. So I'm so excited that Lisa gets to be with the group again. And she's brilliant and amazing and is going to share so much knowledge. I can't wait to hear the stories that come from it.
Well, it wasn't meant this way, friends, but what a great hook. If you're not attending IFDA Smart, you better sign up. And if you were there last year, you get the part 2. So you get the funnel now. You create that excitement. And to your point, there's obviously an awareness in the room, but I think what people are looking for is strategies, insights, best practices, and how do we learn from each other. So before I go to my final question, which probably has a bit of joy built in, because why not? I'm going to ask you, because we do these things to learn from each other. What am I missing? Is there something I'm missing in this conversation? Not bad, huh, Hannah?
Yeah, I think, there's one thing we didn't touch on, which is I didn't bring it up, but I do think mindset is number one. And what we really believe in creating excellent workplace cultures, places, workplaces that don't suck, is to put people first. And that is in contradiction to how businesses are run a lot. Like, I will be very on, we're taught in so many ways. It's like it's money, and then we can think about people. And people are saying they want more flexibility, but that doesn't work with the bottom line. So we're not going to give them the flexibility. And I always, always argue, if you put people first, if you strategize with putting people at the front of all of your decision making, of how you create your culture, of how you're building relationships, everything else will follow. So that was the one thing I think I didn't touch on, but I think starting with that mindset is just going to make everything easier.
So to your point, what they understood is it all starts, if we can get good mindsets in the room, then we can probably lead to psychological safety, building trust, listening aggressively, all the other things that we know matter.
Yes, I love that. I love growth mindset. I will say just one more thing too, since, we touched on generations. I always, I'm a millennial. Okay. So I was born between 1980, 1995. That's how we classify millennials. And we are made fun of so much as the participation trophy generation. And I always like to say we did not give those to ourselves. Okay. So, like, we did not give ourselves the participation trophies. It felt really bad to get a certificate for trying. Like, I'm not saying that it was the best thing ever. However, what I will say it did for many millennials is it instilled a growth mindset, because it's like, well, I tried and I got something, might as well keep trying. Like, it wasn't you tried and you failed, so don't try again. So I always like to just kind of think it's like there's parts of the growth mindset in everyone, and some of us have it more from youth, some of us don't, but we can nurture it. We can always nurture more of that growth mindset. And I love the idea of having it in a room to remind people we're visual creatures. Like, yeah, remember, we're here to grow. It's okay.
Here's the fun question. You have a t-shirt. You pick the color of that t-shirt. You can even bedazzle it. You do you. What word would you choose that you would hope that people would describe you as a leader? Notice I'm keeping it, whether it's leaders in your community, leader with your business partner, Lisa, leader with your clients. What's the word, and why would you choose that word?
So I love this question. And it gets at the piece of we all have our own self-perception, and then there's the perception of others. And so I'm trying to put myself in the minds of people who I have led before. Like, how would you describe me? I'm trying to think of what this is. And I would say, the two words that I always led with as a leader, so maybe people would use this to describe me. Well, there's three. So I'm just going to list three, and I know we only get one, but so maybe I'll put them in order. How about that?
Okay. Okay. You know what? That's clever enough that I will give you three. How about that?
Oh my gosh, thank you. Okay, great. I love that. All right. So number one, I would say, is compassionate, and two is curious, and three is growth. And I think they all play into each other. I'm a two in the Enneagram. I am the helper. I am very much always invested in other people's growth and trying to understand them and trying to make sure that they feel set up for success. And so that's kind of where that compassionate piece comes from me. I always just want to understand, meet people where they're at. And then I really loved always working with interns, because it's like, you are capable of so much. What can you do? Like, there's so much more you can do than you think you can. Like, that just always fired me up. And so I would say, if I were to put those words, it would be compassionate, curious, growth.
And I think, yes, you can prioritize, but ultimately these are three big words. Well, look, Hannah, I think we might have to do a part two at one point, because I can't believe that we're bumping up on time. I wanted to really thank you for the generosity of your time. I'd like to congratulate our listeners for investing time in their personal journey, and hopefully everybody's leaving with at least one key takeaway, one insight, one aha moment that you can take back to your business. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please reshare the link, as together is better as an IFDA community. And thank you once again, Cut and Dry, for being a partner on this passion project. And until next time, friends, keep being great and go get 'em.
This episode is brought to you by Cut and Dry, the only independently verified digital ordering platform that combines e-commerce, payments, and sales tools to help food service distributors sell over 10% more cases within a year. Here's the truth. E-commerce isn't just about going digital. It's about getting discovered. That's why, since 2009, Cut and Dry has led the industry in transforming your inventory into online custom apps that are easy to search, explore, and for your customers to uncover new products. Join us today at cutanddry.com.